Good morning, everyone. We are so happy to have you all with us today for this fantastic conversation about sustainable winter operations. We know winter is coming. We just hope it's going to be a little longer before you actually have to get to it. I want to introduce myself. I'm Donna Shea. I'm the director of the Teachers Center here at the University of Connecticut. Regina, okay to change slide, please. Okay. Okay, we're going to go back for a second to the sponsors. Thank you so much. So first, your panel today is being kind of sponsored by our Education and our Public Works Awareness Committee. I co-chair the Education Committee for the New England chapter. We're very thankful, as always, to our sponsors. They do a lot for our chapter, and we're very happy that we're able to do this good work through their continued support. Today, we have an amazing panel. I want to thank them so very much. This is a very busy group of folks who are very kind to offer their time today to talk about winter operations. So I just want to introduce you to them, and then we're going to start our conversation. First, our Connecticut team is Jim Mahoney, the Executive Director of the Advanced Pavement Laboratory here at UConn and one of my colleagues. Tom Mudzaleski, who's the foreman for the town of Ellington Public Works and a member of our leadership program here at the university. Tom also helps us with our education program for Green Snow Pro. Our Massachusetts team is Mark Valenti, who's the manager of operations for the town of Lexington. And I was very fortunate to get to see him receive his award from the New England chapter of APWA very recently. Congratulations, Mark. Shane Mark, the director of streets and sidewalks for the city of Newton, is with us today. And Mark and Shane do a lot of educational programs in Massachusetts around liquids for winter operations. Our New Hampshire team is Marilee Enos, the director of the New Hampshire LTAB. Ted Dyers was going to be with us, but I think he might have had an emergency. So if he joins us, terrific. If not, Marilee has done great work in New Hampshire, and we look forward to hearing from her. Our Vermont team is Todd Law, the Deputy Division Director for VTrans, and Zach Blodgett. Oh, Ted Dyers is here. Yay. Hi, Ted. So Ted is the administrator for the Watershed Management Bureau for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Thanks, Ted, for joining. Todd Law is our Deputy Division Director for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. And last but certainly not least is Zach Blodgett, Operations Manager for the City of Montpelier. So we have many great questions that were submitted for our panelists, but we do encourage you to put questions into the chat box. Not to worry if we're not able to get to all of them, because our panelists have already agreed that they will answer the questions afterward, and I'll send a communication out to all the participants. In that same communication, I'm going to include some resources that we've been provided with by the panelists. So you'll get a little follow-up from us afterward with some great additional resources. First, we're going to start with 3 poll questions that will give our panelists a sense of where you are in your winter operations strategies. Regina, can we launch question 1? So the first question is, does your agency use liquids as part of your winter operations plan? If you could take a moment to answer that, that would be super. Okay. All right, I think we can stop the poll and show those results. So panel, let's see here.
Is it showing, Donna?
Not the results, just the question. So I can speak.
So the results are 67% said yes and 30% says no.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks, Regina. Okay, you can launch the second one. So the second question is, does your agency calibrate your application equipment? Wow, super. 77% of you are already calibrating your equipment. That's fantastic. And with 23%, no, that's okay. We have lots of opportunity to talk about ways to support you in that. So thank you for that. Now, I think the last question might be impacted by the fact that a lot of you are calibrating. So what is your typical application rate for de-icing chemicals on a lane mile basis? And you see the many options here for you to answer. Okay, panelists, we have quite a variety here. 7% less than 200 pounds, 41% in the 200 to 300 pound range, 24% in the 300 to 400 pound range, and then 28% unsure of the typical application rate. So lots of great things to talk about there. Thank you very much, Regina. Appreciate your launching the polls for us. So let's get started on this conversation. We're going to start with Zach in Vermont, in Montpelier. Zach, how do you define sustainable winter operations, and what does that exactly mean to your agency's operations? And you just want to unmute, Zach?
Sorry about that. Thank
No
you.
problem. Sure.
So for our agency, Sustainable Winter Operations deals with all of the components that go into providing a long-term and successful maintenance program. And specifically in my agency, there are three main components which all play a part to sustainable winter operations. The first, and likely the most obvious, is the environmental side of things. The second is workforce and equipment. And lastly is the residents or the community in which we provide the service to. For the environment, making sure that we are reducing the amount of salt entering our waterways is really a key component, as it has an impact on the overall water quality, which is, as climate change becomes a bigger issue, is a growing concern for most communities. Committing to consistently improve and reduce the salt usage is critical to protecting our environment. The second sustainable consideration is on the workforce and equipment that is being used to complete these operations. It's crucial to have a program that is appropriate for the level of service that you're being asked to provide. This should include having SOPs in place to clean and take care of your equipment to protect its life expectancy. And lastly is the component of the community and residents, and having a program that allows your workforce to be successful with the level of service that you're being asked to provide. So be sure to manage those level of expectations, and so that your staff is capable of producing the expectations that you're being asked to do.
Thanks, Zach. Mark, I'm going to shift to you for a second, because we hear a lot about those balancing of priorities of safety, sustainability, the residents' level of service, as Zach just mentioned. But how do you balance all that? What are your strategies for balancing that?
So one thing that we've actually been working on for quite a few years now is trying to make the program more sustainable. We've been trying to do a lot more with our in-house staff. We've been trying to reduce the contracted services. We've also been using a lot of innovative technologies, especially with the liquids. We've cut down our salt consumption by probably close to 35–40% by going heavy on the liquids, which is also making it more sustainable. We have 3 watershed districts. We have a reservoir for a community that's a couple of towns over that owns property here. So for us, we've really embraced the tech. There's a lot of stuff out there. We've gone to composite plow blade technology to further help reduce, the slush that you have on the roadways. But I can't pinpoint on one thing. It's more basically trying to figure out what works best. And if it's one thing that I can say though too is everybody's got different roadways. Everybody's got different routes. They got different staff. They got different levels of service. So it is a little bit of trial and error, and it's communicating with everybody else that we work with in the area. It's also reaching out to other places in the country that might be ahead of us with some technology, and seeing how we can basically implement it here and see if it works for us. But there's definitely not a one size fits all. You just got to continue pushing and pushing and pushing and trying out new things. You know, just because we did it last year, that's not an answer anymore for any of the customers that we have out there. There's too much information floating about the internet for people to say, well, it's good enough. It doesn't work anymore.
Those are great points. So Todd, as you heard Zach mention their kind of comprehensive plan, what would you say? Would you say there's been kind of a most successful strategy for V-Trans? Or what are some of the things that you have found to be very successful in your sustainable winter operations program?
I think one of the biggest things is having a fairly comprehensive snow and ice control plan. Having that plan alleviates a lot of issues with the customers. It provides them with a lot of information about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and especially the different materials that you're going to use. And I think to Mark's point, you know, we've been trying all kinds of different materials across the board here for many years in Vermont to reduce our salt usage and all kinds of different salts, not just your typical sodium chloride, using other types of salt, especially when they're most effective, when temperatures are cold. So we also are part of another group called Clear Roads, with a consortium of multiple snow states, DOTs that are engaged with research projects. So we have a lot of research projects, and a lot of that information is on the website, available to everybody. So it's always good to partner with some of the bigger organizations. And of course, we're embracing with Federal Highways on this endeavor. And as this pooled fund has been extremely beneficial across the board. So some of the other innovations that we're using are our road weather information system stations that provide a lot of great information of road conditions, surface temperatures, which is what we utilize for applying our materials, and the expectation of what the applications rate should be. But I think first and foremost, training the employees has always been a primary, and actually we have some going on today with some of our newer employees for the Agency of Transportation, because without training our employees on the expectations, you know, we're sending them out into the wild, wild west with no ammunition. So.
Right. You know, I'm going to shift for a second. Thanks, Todd. I'm going to shift for a second to Jim Mahoney, because when Todd mentioned the partnerships on research, Jim, we talk a lot about more data that's coming out showing the increase in impact of chlorides in many drinking supply wells in Connecticut and, you know, throughout New England. What can or should, from your perspective, public works departments and DOTs and others be doing to mitigate these impacts?
Well, I'm going to start with just a quote from Fred Rogers, and it's a very simple one. And it is, if you can mention it, you can manage it. And for those of you who don't know who Fred Rogers is, that's Mr. Rogers, the legendary Mr. Rogers. But part of that is that there's a need for communication, and we need to be able to get it out on the table and discuss the issues. Todd, you were talking about level of service. There's a need to understand that there are different roads within each municipality that have different needs for levels of service. If you happen to have a healthcare facility or something along those lines on one of your areas, obviously that's going to require more material than other areas. And so there's a communication that needs to happen within the actual staff itself for public works departments to be able to understand those needs and what those are. Also, what the expectations are for level of service. Okay, if it's a very rural town, do you just stop applying material and just plow during the middle of the storm, or is there a reason to continue to apply material? So I think it's very important that there's a good communication out there and that everybody begins to do that. And also what Todd was also talking about was communicating with the public. There needs to be a understanding and having a plan that's public that people can see, so they understand the priority areas and then the not so priority areas, which always makes everybody not so happy, but that's just the reality of the discussion, so that you understand, okay, this is an area that we're going to be getting to first, and then we'll get to everybody so that there's an understanding of this, of the system as well. We've seen it when towns have switched from a sand salt mix to an all salt mix, residents complaining that, hey, my road wasn't treated. Come on, guys, what are you doing here? But the reality is that the salt is doing its job. It just takes it a minute. It doesn't show as easily. So there's a need for communication to really make this all happen, both internally and externally, so that everybody understands. And lastly, that the residents understand that their demands for this high level of service are driving higher uses of salt, which are ultimately increasing the chlorides and everything else that we're seeing in our wells and surface water bodies. So it's a very shared responsibility amongst everybody, and communication is the key.
Thanks, Jim. We talk a lot here about communication and education on this particular topic. I'm going to shift over to you, Ted, in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire really led the way in developing the Green Snow Pro certification program. Can you tell me what the critical elements of that program are for your New Hampshire, for you both private and municipal folks?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. And I really enjoy hearing the stories from folks like Zach and Mark, Jim, and others, to really hear about the good work that you're all doing. And I think that that's the takeaway from all of this, is that there's no one size fits all. I think that's a really good point. So we developed, our focus has been on the private sector. So in New Hampshire, our focus has really been on making sure that we're providing some good training opportunities for the private sector, because what we found in looking at the sources of salt, especially in the developed southern part of the state, is that most of the salt is coming from private sources. It's not coming from, the vast majority is not coming from municipal and state highways. Now, obviously that's localized. There are places where it certainly is, and I can show you some very interesting examples with some great data behind it. But the point is that we think that the much bigger challenge was the private sector. So we have a training program that we stole from Minnesota, and I fully expect everybody else to steal from us or from anybody else. And that we developed a training program. We heard early on from the private contractors that it was the liability issues that kept them from really embracing this concept of salt reduction. So we addressed that through some legislation that provides limited liability relief for the people who go through our Green Snow Pro certification. So it requires a 4-hour training course, and then it requires every 2 years a 2-hour refresher. You have to track your salt and report on your salt, and you have to pay a fee and do an application. We have masters, and then masters can have subordinates. So the masters do all the reporting, and then they can have subordinates. And so we've developed this program, and it has been, I think, very successful at getting people to train. It's been very successful at getting people to be more aware of their salt use at lots of different levels, because it requires the subordinates to be trained as well. So that has been, I think, the good aspect of it. The questions are, does it work? Are we actually causing a reduction in salt? We certainly have great stories like the one that Mark told, where we've seen reductions of 20, 30, 40, 50%. So we know that there are people who are embracing this, but in terms of the overall reduction of chlorides across all of the people who are applying, we still hear the same stories, that you go out, and Jim talked about this a little bit. You go out, you clear the roads, everything's copacetic. The property manager shows up, I don't see any salt. So you go down, you put a little salt just so that you don't need it, because you already cleared the high sidewalks, but you throw a little down, appease the property manager. He goes back out an hour later and says, I don't see enough salt. And that's when you see, like, the crunchy sidewalks that, track stuff in all through the carpets and everywhere else. And there it's just, blue from the dye in the salt. This is really unacceptable. And that's the piece that I think we all need to start working on towards changing that. We are also launching a new municipal program. We have authorization to do that. We've just started to outline what that municipal certification program will look like. Very excited to hear from you all. about the good work that you're doing, and then we'll see how we, bring that in. It's just starting to outline what that program is going to look like. But the focus is going to be, instead of on individual operators, it's going to be on the program as a whole. And it's going to bring in those elements that you've all talked about: level of service, planning, materials, equipment, tracking, training. All of those things will be brought in some manner into the program.
That's super. And that's a perfect segue to Marilee, my LTAP colleague in New Hampshire. Oh, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, there was just one thing,
Sure.
just to circle back with what Ted said.
Sure.
I think the one thing that we all have to understand, if we've all been doing this long enough, the one thing that we got to realize is that nothing happens overnight. I know that I put together a program. It was a equipment improvement program that was over a period of 5 years. Well, it took us 9 years. Talking about implementing new technology and making a transition in chloride reduction or new equipment and reintroducing wing blades, and all of those facets of your operation all need to plan it out, and you need to stick to the plan. But, it's taken us a dozen years to get to where we are. So it's not like we just snap the fingers and everything goes away and everything's great. So I think everybody on the panel will probably agree that there's years of planning and execution and training before you can really see some serious drastic changes. But I guess the point is don't give up.
Thanks. That's a great point. Marilee, so how are you supporting your municipal agencies currently in their sustainable winter operations? I know you have many trainings and programs. So tell us a little bit about some of the ways that you're helping towns be able to get some of these plans in place.
Awesome. Definitely. Thanks, Donna. So at T2, we're really pleased that we do have that great working relationship with Ted and his team at Department of Environmental Services. So we can support the really incredible work they're doing through the Green Snow Pro program, but also leverage those practices to share with our local road agencies. We're all one state. We share the same recreational opportunities, the same waterways and environment. So somewhat similar to what Jim mentioned earlier regarding that shared responsibility, we all do have a part in working towards the sustainable salt use. So excited about the formal direction that might be coming along for municipalities. But of course, and like all of our LTAP centers, we provide a lot of training that is outside the Green Snow Pro program, and it can count in some cases towards certification training requirements. But from a municipal perspective, we want to make sure we're sharing those practices with them. So we do continually build out the training on winter operations. If somebody's looking to recertify for Green Snow Pro, we want to make sure they're not maybe taking the same course they took with us a couple years ago, and we're giving them new content, but also for our municipal friends and Public Works to have new access to content. So last year we introduced data-driven winter maintenance decisions, and that's a workshop that we really take a look at how you make decisions around storm response, the factors that influence your response, how you track that and use that data to analyze the response and plan for future events. We provide some tools that support those efforts for local agencies, a really great interactive Excel file that they can use for capturing their data, as well as talk about access to the salt applicator reporting system that's part of the Green Snow Pro program. Just last week, we launched our new Snow Fighter seminar. So that starts with about an hour of pre-work, some videos and such. And then when we get into the classroom, we're talking about how salt works, the science of salt, how it doesn't work, how you make those decisions, looking at pavement temperature, forecasting. Our friends at Innovative Surface Solutions will join us to talk about liquids and innovative de-icers and treated salts, and so that we can have a good sense of that. And then we go out and we do a walk around. So Scott and Butch, our instructors, walk around and discuss pre and post trip inspection. They talk about calibration. We go through a calibration demonstration, and then we go back into the class, and our local agency participants get to actually help figure out the calculations and see where we're at for calibrating that equipment. So that was really well received. It went great last week. We're looking forward to rolling that out at other parts of throughout New Hampshire this fall. And then the other area that we support our local agencies is in trying to give them tools and resources to help tell their story about how they're adapting and using new practices for winter maintenance. So things have changed over 10, 15, 20 years, and giving them tools and ideas to share that with their community and with their driving and traveling public. So through digital badges or micro credentials or stories or Facebook posts, if they train with us, we encourage them to tag and share their accomplishments just so that they can get that conversation going within their communities as well about what they're doing to impact sustainable salt use and the professionalism that goes into the decisions they make and how they respond to storm events.
And increase the communication with the community, of course, which is helpful.
Yeah, to help inform, absolutely.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. Mark, I have kind of a two-part question for you. So with the change in climate, ice storms seem to be becoming more common. What is the best way to approach an ice freezing rain event so as to not end up with a skating rink for roads? And talk a little bit, if you can, about brine treatments before a storm and if they're worth it to explore that as an opportunity.
So I'll answer part two first because it's probably easier to answer than the first part. So we do have some, and I believe we have some attachments too, Donna, that we are going to share with everybody. So it's basically the go, no go brine application treatment. It's a go, no go sheet that's been developed from the Winter Maintenance Subcommittee for APWA. Myself and Shane Mark actually are members of that committee right now. That's a national committee with about 30 snow fighters from around the country and Canada who, we brainstorm and see what we can come up with. And it's technology that we've tried, or we're researching new tech and so on and so forth. But that is a great starting point for you if you're looking to do some anti-icing. And there's a couple of places where it's, no go, where it could be fog, it could be a wet event, you could have a lot of wind blowings. So I would start with that, and also forecasting. Like, you got to talk to your weather forecasters. We spend a lot of money every year making sure we have a good weather forecasting system and a good meteorologist. We took it one more level, and we invested in the forecasting service for people that are that agency, or not the agency, but the company's familiar with road temperature forecasting and road forecasting. So for us, it's more along the lines of not talking about what's coming in, but it's okay, well, we're projecting what the road temperatures are. So based on what the road temps are, it might be favorable for us to put down a DLA application of, 50 gallons a mile of salt brine, but by the time the weather comes, it's going to be low moisture snow, and the road temps are going to be down to about, maybe 12 degrees. If that's the case, we're not putting it down because you're going to attract the moisture and you're going to develop packs. So, those are the situations that you just kind of live and learn, and you reach out to the people that are used to doing that kind of application. And that also goes back to the ice storms and fighting the ice storms. Here in New England, more of us are getting ice storms. We got burned really badly one year, and we did a brine application, and then all of a sudden it went from snow to ice and back to snow and back to ice. And we had about 2.5 inches of pack on the road, and we had to fight that. And it took a long time. Well, I hit the panic button, and I called my friend out in the Midwest who deals with ice storms all the time. And I said, listen, what do I do here? And he says, listen, you're going to have to de-ice it. You're going to have to fight it, and you're going to have to deal with it. He said, next time you talk to your forecasters, you figure out what's coming in. And when you see it turning, you got to adjust your application rates, and you got to ramp it up. And the only way that you can deal with it is you got to fight it, you got to plow it, and you got to treat it. And he said, you can't stop. But it's the people that are used to doing it. And that goes back to what I was saying before. It's you have to communicate. And some of the other panelists have said, like, you talk to the people who have already done it and the people who are used to doing it. You're not alone, and there's plenty of resources out there. And I'm always willing to talk to anyone to give them any of my do's or don'ts, or trust me, failures are a much better tool to learn from than a success. Everybody can say how great they are, but everybody's afraid to talk about how much they failed. And I think that's where you learn the most, and you just don't make the same mistake twice.
That's great. I know that you and Shane have a strong collaboration on working on liquids. Shane, so the question that we received was, is liquid application a viable replacement for granular material? Can you talk a little about that?
Can't start the video. There we go. Sorry, I'm having an issue.
That's okay. No, you're good.
We can hear you.
Yep, we can hear you great.
So liquids are a very viable solution, but they're a tool in the toolbox. Everybody has to realize that salt does not work until it goes into a liquid. Applying dry salt to a roadway will not work until it gets wet and goes into a solution. So we're always looking at ways to throw down liquids prior to the snowstorm, provided that the weather allows us to. Again, liquids are just another tool in the toolbox, but I think we should all be looking at using them, because by using liquids, you can reduce your salt consumption, as Mark spoke about earlier.
That's great. Does anyone from another municipality or DOT have a perspective on using liquids that you want to share? I know, Mark, you feel strongly about them in your.
Yeah, I can share. Oh,
Okay.
Oh, go.
Yeah, I can share some of our successes we've had with liquids.
Sure.
Much to like Shane said, it is important to use less salt, and with liquids, we use it to pre-wet our granular salt, not as a replacement, but it's been proven, and the research has proven that you can save 30 to 40% by using liquids to pre-wet your granular salt by keeping it on the roadway. Anything that goes off to the side, and Ted will attest to this, it doesn't go away, but it also doesn't do any benefit to the roadway. So we want to keep the salt within the roadway, and as Shane said, it activates it immediately. So we eliminated a lot of the packs that we saw in the past. To Mark's point, the other issue is liquid salt brine, whatever you want to call it, sodium chloride and water is 23.3% salt, and so the rest of that is just water, drinking water, typically. So it's already diluted. If you use that during an ice storm, as Mark said, then your road's gonna go to ice pretty quickly because it dilutes so fast. Moisture content in snow is a lot less than it is in freezing rain and ice, and so that's why there's more success in liquid use, especially salt brines, in snow events. Now, the other thing that we're really not talking a lot about, and I heard the name Innovative Surface Solutions, who we use also, is magnesium chloride that works to lower temperatures into the sub-zero range, 30 to 40 degrees. So granular salt only works into, maybe effectively, maybe into the single digits, and there it's not so beneficial or efficient. So about 15 to 20 degrees, we switch over and start using the magnesium chloride blend. And again, it's lower application rates to get the same level of service. So we've used it very, very successfully to keep our granular salt rates down. The thing that granular salt does is gives you that longevity. So you wet it, you keep it on the road, it gives you that residual. So the next time you come back, because most of our routes are, an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes more. So whatever's falling out of the sky is either accumulating, or hopefully if we have residuals, melting off and not packing on, as Mark said. Those factors are extremely important. Out west, they have switched over. I know Utah DOT has done this very successfully, has gone from granular salt to liquid only routes, which were actually unheard of. They baffled me, but they're using them very successfully in some of their higher elevations. They also get warmer temperatures right after their storms than we normally do. So, it's that balance. We need the residual, nothing that's going to run off into the road edge, because again, then it doesn't go away. But liquids are huge tool in our toolbox. 90% of our trucks are set up with liquids. Either buy liquids that you can spray on your salt, or buy treated salt for colder temperatures are the things that we usually do. So whether it's liquids applied or liquids that's pre-applied to your salt, pre-treating.
Yeah. Hey, you brought up some good points, Todd. And the one thing, the liquid only routes, a lot of people looking into that. It's a really, really cool tech. Your cycle times have to be super short. You got to make sure you have a monster unit to apply the liquid, because I'm pretty sure they're upward around 60, 70, 80 gallons per lane mile. You know, you go into the smart spreader tech and the slurry technology, you're running somewhere around 30 or 50 gallons per ton. And then you're using a significant amount less of your granular. You know, I know that some other people out there in the Western, you know, Midwest, and I know Iowa DOT's totally, that they do the shake and bake, you know, and you got a tandem axle unit, you got granular salt, and you got a liquid tanker, and, you know, you're dropping maybe 150 pounds of salt, and then you're throwing down 60, 80 gallons of per lane mile of salt, straight salt brine, and they're dealing with it, and they're keeping their roads open with that, which is rather interesting. But to Todd's point also, New England is unique. New England has some different climates. We have some microclimates. What works in Vermont may not necessarily work in Mass. We're more temperate here in Mass. I stay away from calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, because we're so temperate. We really don't need it. I'll throw some organic into the salt brine, throw 10, 15% in there just to get the residual and get the most out of the salt crystals, keep them on the pavement longer. The bounce and scatter thing that Todd said too, I think what's interesting, I always like to make a point of it. The study was initially done in the 70s for Michigan DOT. They proved it again in the 2000s and came out with the same data. And you know, when you're talking about losing 30+% of salt off the pavement versus, you know, 7% when you just pre-wet, that's a no-brainer as to why we should be pre-wetting at the spinner or at the chute or conveyor or what have you. I mean, that's where, you know, we talk about the 30% savings on salt applications. But great points. But, you know, it was a good reminder, though. We have a lot of different climates, and you don't always need a sledgehammer if you just need a little ping hammer to take care of what you got based on your temps and your road temps.
Mark, that actually, I'm going to take a little diversion into the chat box for a second, because their question is so appropriate to what you're talking about. And it says, when you apply liquids directly to the pavements, are you using straight salt brine, sodium chloride, or a blend of salt and magnesium or calcium chloride? Or are you doing both depending on the pavement temp?
Mark, I could jump into that. Sorry, I was having some technology issues and had to reboot my computer, so I apologize to everyone.
Great, thanks for that.
So one of the keys, and I totally missed what Todd said, I caught on the back end there, but again, just a tool in the toolbox. You know, Mark and I, being closer to the coast, are looking at reducing the chlorides as the best we can. So a couple years ago, we made the decision to only use sodium chloride through rock salt, and we got rid of the calcium chloride and our magnesium chloride. So we're both using organics. Every storm, when we go out prior to the storm with liquids, we're mixing a sodium chloride salt brine with organics, beet juice. Is what we're using here in Newton. We're doing about an 80-20 or 85-15 mix, depending on the weather. Now, that might not get you the same results if you're out in the Berkshires or if you're up in Vermont or New Hampshire. So you're going to want to use what's the most appropriate tool in your toolbox for your environment and for your location. But it's a blend. You could use everything. But again, we're trying to reduce our chloride usage, and that's why we've chosen not to use chloride. Quite frankly, here in Newton, we get maybe one if it's worst case scenario, maybe 2 storms a year where we get that really cold weather where the magnesium or the calcium will help, but that's very rare. Most of the time, the sodium chloride is doing the job. And the additional thing I would say that we haven't really talked about much yet is using the liquids in conjunction with your salt, but making sure you're calibrated. As Jim said, you can't manage what you can't measure. And if you don't know what you're putting out there on the roadway, whether it's liquids or whether it's salt, you're never going to be able to manage your operation. So you have to calibrate and use these tools together.
So
Yes.
Donna, can I make a quick point about
Absolutely. It's a great point, Shane. Thank you for bringing that up.
about magnesium and calcium real quick? Is that
Sure.
if if you don't actually need it based on the temperatures, you really shouldn't be using it from a salt reduction perspective. And the reason for that, if just periodic table of elements, is that it takes 2 magnesiums for every 1 sodium to form up a salt molecule. So that means that when you're putting down magnesium, if you're using anywhere near the same rate you're using for sodium chloride, is that you're putting down twice the chlorides. And it's the chlorides that are toxic to the environment. And so I want to just make sure that you enter into that decision with eyes wide open, based on, I think, as Shane eloquently put it, that you're really basing it on the situation that you're facing, and you have to have a mission critical need to be able to use that. There are certain conditions in which that's really helpful, or at very low concentrations that allow you to vastly reduce your sodium chloride, because remember, you're using twice the chlorides if you're using mag. So, and I guess just to throw in a dad joke, when we talk about magnesium, we just say, oh, MG.
So, yeah, that's a great point.
That is.
I think we lose sight a lot of times that snow and ice control is both an art and a science. And oftentimes, most of us as snow and ice professionals are leaning more towards the art side of the house as opposed to the science side of the house. And snow and ice control is first and foremost science-based. You have to use those science elements that we were taught in high school and college, and then use the art aspect to highlight those and make it make your program better. But you have to tap into the science, and that's one thing we really teach when Mark and I teach with our local LTAP Bay State Roads here in Mass, is you've got to use the science. It seems counterproductive, like when we talk about liquids. Why would you ever throw liquids onto a roadway that's below freezing? Well, because you have them mixed with salt, and salt lowers the freezing point of the roadway. So that's why it's science. So that's a great point, Ted. Thanks for reminding us of that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ted. So I'm going to shift for a second over to Tom. Tom, we were just talking about the environmental impacts, but one of the things we hear a lot from municipalities is the impacts on equipment deterioration. So what are some of the methods for reducing excessive equipment deterioration that you may have found?
That's a great question. Thanks, Donna. I'm sure every one of our panelists probably could talk to this. I'll just tell you what we use here in Ellington. And washing is key. Obviously, I think every government agency will tell themselves and the general public that keeping the vehicles clean is the most important thing. Washing after every storm. So that's what we do. The trucks come back, we dump them off, we wash all the salt off. Then in the fall, prior to winter operations, we power wash everything, and then we treat with a product called fluid film, which is a wax-based product. It's reasonably safe for the environment, and it sticks to the vehicle very well, and it basically seals out the air, so rust has a hard time forming. We've had tremendous success for this. I'll give you a brief example. In 2012, when I came on board as a mechanic, the lead mechanic dragged our salt conveyor out, and hadn't been treated with anything in quite a few years. And his procedure to get the thing ready was to start beating things with a hammer to free up all the rust. And I'm watching him, and rollers are falling off of this conveyor, and the battery box drops on the ground. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to take months to get this thing ready. So that year we found fluid film, and we treated it. And the next year we pulled that same salt conveyor out, and it was a dramatic difference. There was just a couple rollers that were frozen up rather than virtually all of them, and nothing falling off in sheets of rust. So it's not a plug by any means for the product, but fluid film is available in like a tan or a black color. Goes on very well. We use an old line striper machine in a 5-gallon bucket. We coat everything with it, from the hydraulic lines, the frame rails, undersides of the bodies. There's so many nooks and crannies on these trucks that we use during winter operations. You really got to spray this stuff everywhere, so you kind of want to use a high pressure sprayer to do that. So washing and treating before the winter starts is key in our operation.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Any other innovative strategies that you have for that? I think that was great information.
I like the idea of the old line spraying machine to have a second life of the fluid film machine. That stuff does work well. We've been using it here too. It's a great product. I know it's a little bit of a plug, but it definitely does the job, and it eats away the rust over time. So especially if you got a lot of hydraulic fittings and the like, it will actually counteract the rust, and you'll end up having a nice, metal fitting to attach and reconnect when you need to.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm shifting over to Todd in Vermont because a lot of what we talked about is around communication. So Todd, what are some of the tips on keeping the public and the elected officials, which we're all trying to do, educated on the why and how storms are managed, so they're not always doing the Monday morning quarterbacking of you after every storm? Do you have any tips for?
Yeah, I think back to the snow and ice control plan, making sure that number one, that you get that endorsed and embraced by your governing body is always helpful. I've done that in the past, whether it's the select board where I've been. Here we have the Secretary of Transportation review it and ensure that what we're saying is what they expect, their expectations, but then providing it either through your website. If I get fan mail, concerns, complaints from our traveling public, our customers, I definitely provide a link to that snow and ice control plan. And I think that helps to at least provide some level of information to our customers, which is extremely important. Our customers want to know what we're doing, why we're doing it. One of the other things that we did, we have a GPS or AVL system, automated vehicle location system in our trucks. So we can see the application rates, whether the plow up, plow down, vehicle speeds, etc. But we provide that information, at least the location of the truck, on a web map, so our customers can see it. So we alleviated a lot of the calls of I haven't seen the plow truck, because they could actually look back for at least I think it was about an hour that they could see the lag of the truck route and their whatever they call it, the breadcrumb trail that's around the truck. And that helped to alleviate some of that concern of the truck hasn't been here, and alleviating that, trying to explain when it's snowing, we're not going to spread enough salt to melt everything off for the environment, for the budget, for all these numerous reasons that we've talked about. It's not viable or sustainable to have enough salt out there to melt everything that comes down in a 2-hour period. And then of course there's filling back up the truck. And so, I think that helps some of that Monday morning quarterback, just to have that good playbook that you're utilizing and can provide to your customers.
That's great. Thank you, Todd. I want to shift over to Tom now for a minute, because we've talked a lot about what you all are doing and suggestions about what you feel will be strategies that people could implement. I want to look at a case study in Ellington about what has worked for them and what they're seeing for savings. Tom, do you mind sharing that now, and then we can jump back into some questions after?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Donna. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen.
Great.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah, super.
It should say the 548 tons of salt there on the top left.
Yes,
Okay,
great.
so basically what this slide shows is our prior to our Sustainable Winter Operations Program implementation in 2018-19. We implemented the program in 2019-20. So this is what we were currently applying. This particular storm, as you can see there in the left side, this is total snow accumulation was 4 to 5 inches, about 1/8 of inches ice. We were physically in and on and off the roads for 24 hours. And that storm, we used 548 tons of salt. To put that in perspective, we have about 95 miles of road, and 5 to 6 of those are dirt. We also use a Clear Lane product, which is the green salt magnesium chloride treated. I'm going to try to switch this, okay, to the next slide. So this is after implementing the Sustainable Winter Operations Program. This is a storm in 2019, actually the first storm of the year. So it was a real good trial to see if what we were doing was actually going to work. It was a 2-day storm. The first day was 3 to 4 inches of snow. And then the second day was another 10 inches. So 14 inches total of snow. We were in and on the roads for 44 hours, and we used 280 tons of salt. So that's a dramatic decrease in the salt usage. We were calibrating prior to this, but we were not calibrating to, I'll call it the industry standard. We were calibrating to old weights and measures, and it just was not best management practices. So by changing those calibration rates and what we did for salt usage, we ended up returning about $80,000 in last year's budget to the general fund. We reduced our overall annual salt budget by 500 tons, which is immediate $35,000 savings for us right off the top. And then, of course, as we move this program forward, because we'll never be really done fine tuning it, there's potential for more savings, and these results also don't account for parking lot usage. We haven't really talked much about that. You know, everybody figures lane mile application rates, and Ted brought up private contractors. Well, private contractors are the ones that are dumping it in the parking lots, and that's where you see a total disarray of salt, like a white parking lot. Well, even in our area, it's a white parking lot prior to the event. So it's if we can get our own application in the parking lots under wraps, as well as the contractors, it's going to be quite beneficial to us in the future. And that's all I have for that.
That's great. That's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. We're starting to see some really positive results of implementing sustainable winter operations here in New England. Shane, I want to jump back to you for a second, because you came from Columbus, Ohio, a place that I think is super. And now you're seeing experiences from both places, the Midwest and here. What are some of the lessons you want to share about the differences in your experiences?
I would say first and foremost, the biggest lesson I've learned so far is that New Englanders are a very hardy group of people, but they can be very stubborn at times as well. The things that have been occurred in the Midwest, things we've been doing in the Midwest, Ohio, Illinois, Montana, Minnesota, they've been doing these things for 20 plus years. Brine has been out there, liquids on the roadway. Brine's been out there for 20, 25 plus years in the Midwest. So it's 25 years history of proven use that they work, and bringing those liquids here to New England area has been very difficult from my point of view. I think mainly because I'm an outsider. I haven't grown up here. I don't know the weather. I don't know what we go through. So it's overcoming those personal challenges of an outsider coming in, bringing new ideas, which really aren't new. They're old ideas, they're proven ideas, but they're new to the area. So particularly for me, being 20 years in the service, 20 years in the Army, retired out of the Army, you know, you say, we're going to do this in the Army, you do what you're told. Here, I can't just direct. I have to lead and coach and mentor and bring people aboard. So the biggest thing I've learned with this, it's been a humbling experience, is you have to get people to believe in what you're trying to do. And the best way to do that is to get them involved from day one, get them trained, send them through your LTAP courses, send them through as many snow as ice classes you can, invest that training into them, bring them along, explain the process of what you want to accomplish, and then let them take the reins and start coming to you with, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how we want to accomplish it, and allow them to learn. That's what's really made our success here in Newton. This is my 7th snow and ice season here in the town of Newton. We've only been running liquids for 3 years. So it took us 4 years to get to this point. And then even with running the liquids the first year, you would think by running those liquids, we were going to kill everyone saying these liquids don't work, they're horrible. But now those same people that were saying that are coming back saying, we need to be using liquids more. We need to apply more liquids. So that's been a really rewarding experience for me, seeing those attitudes flip and now people being part of the solution as opposed to fighting the solution.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it gets back to Mark's original comments about this is a long-term situation. You have to each year and maybe have the small wins and get the buy-in from people and share those stories. I think sharing these stories is so important because other people will be at different places in this process and to learn from you all. I want to go to Jim Mahoney for a second because we were talking about salt. And we hear a lot of people doing research on alternatives to salt. So are there alternatives for keeping snow ice operations, kind of safe, such as agricultural, food byproducts, those things we hear people talk about?
Yeah, one of the interesting things I'm always asked is that everybody figures there's got to be an alternative to chlorides. Oh, we're just hiding them because reasons X, Y, or Z. Well, the reality is that obviously, as you're all well aware, chlorides are the backbone of what we do for snow and ice control. Some of these agricultural products, they do have some benefits. They help to prevent refreezing of water, but they're not really good at actually removing snow and ice. So the beet juice, that kind of thing, in order for it to really truly be effective, and Shane, you were talking about this, that you mix it in with your brine already, because in order for it to have that effectiveness of getting rid of snow and ice, you need the chlorides in there to do this. And it comes back to the science that Ted was talking about, that the chlorides are what attract the moisture, and that's what really gets rid of the salt. And then the agricultural products help to prevent that from refreezing. So there's a lot of benefit to them if used correctly and people understand their limitations. It's just everybody thinks that we can go crazy and use these things everywhere. And then in terms of the other materials, such as the acetates, oh, they're great, except they cost a fortune. Salt costs you what, 60 to 70 bucks a ton, whereas acetates cost you just short of $1 a pound. So you don't get very far with that. So great for a runway to keep the engines from rusting on a plane, but not necessarily feasible on a network scale.
The other thing that Jim just should note about those other products and many of these products that we see is you don't know exactly what's in them. That's one problem. There is not a clearinghouse for third-party assessment of non-chloride items. I mean, I think that this is a huge issue that we need to have some leadership from the federal government or through our DOTs or someplace to develop a playground to test some of these bad boys out. But the other thing that is the real issue that we have with alternatives is that they tend to have extraordinarily high biological oxygen demand. And this is a problem in the winter. If you're draining directly into a lake or a stream, you can put this stuff in and it will eat all of the oxygen out of the water immediately at a time of year in which oxygen is already a problem. So this is a problem for natural waterways. If you don't have a way for that material to go through the soil, and it loses that BOD pretty quickly in the soil. But if you put that stuff directly into a water body, it can be very deadly for that water body. So this is another reason why we need to have a better testing capability to be able to put a good housekeeping seal of approval on alternative materials.
Great point, Ted. That's another reason why we basically don't even go over 15% with the sugar beet derivative products, because the BODs, the recommended rate's 20%, and the BODs at 20% are rough. That's why we even try and keep it down at 10%, and we literally use it not for the anti-corrosion capability, but we use it strictly for the residual factor and keeping the salts on the pavement. Hopefully there's some good stuff happening in the future. I am actually working with Washington State University on a completely new organic that's not on the market right now. Hopefully there'll be some changes within the next couple of seasons here with something that is actually even more of a regional solution too, that we potentially could have right here in our backyards. And the big component with that is looking at the BOD levels and trying to find a product that actually does not have as many BODs as the current products that are out there, that also does maintain the same or just about the same level of performance across the board for all of the other facets of what that organic can do. And I guess the good thing is yeah, you know, you actually would know where the product is coming from because it's a very simplistic cocktail. So it's pretty interesting stuff. And like I said, hopefully it'll be right in our backyard within the next season or two.
Thanks, Mark and Ted. Great points. So before I let the panelists have an opportunity to share a final words of wisdom, I do want to get to David's question, and it's open to any of the panelists who'd like to respond. David says, I learned in another course that if chloride concentration in the brine layer increases beyond the optimal point, the ice melting temperature actually increases. Can sharing this fact with the public and subordinates push against the concept that if a little salt is good, more salt is better? Anyone want to take that?
Well,
That's a great question. So Mark mentioned earlier that he and I are both part of the winter maintenance subcommittee for APWA. And every year at the Snow and Ice Conference, we teach a class. The subcommittee hosts a class and we teach a class for winter operations. And they cover this extensively. The thought process is, well, if a little salt's good, more salt's better. But what they found is that, especially with liquids, is like with brine, liquid brine, the optimal solution is 23.3%, which is roughly 2.26 pounds per gallon. People have increased that, saying, well, hey, if I increase that percentage, I'll get a better product, I'll get a better result. Well, when they've gone out there, what's happened, and this is where Ted could jump in, but
Shane, I'm trying to grab a eutectic curve for you.
Yeah,
right
it'll
now.
grab the freezing point and actually make the freezing point higher than what it normally is. So if it's like 32 degrees, it could jump it up to 36 degrees. So now you're applying that out there and it's counterproductive to what you should be doing. Once again, it's the science that comes into it. It's things we don't think about, but there's a whole eutectic curve there. We teach a long class on that in the winter operations class that APWA leads at the Snow and Ice Conference. So stick to the recommendations.
Shane, can you see that?
We can see it, Mark.
All right. You want to go through it one more time so here's your optimum salt concentration here, 23.3%. So you can see that if you actually increase it a little bit more, you're gonna hit this area here. And yes, you are correct. It will raise in temperature, and you'll, just like on the backside here too. Actually, this one's actually even better here. Let's take a look at this one. This is actually to Todd's point here too, using the mag. Here's the different eutectic curves for your mag, your calcium, and your sodium chlorides. So you can see what and now this is a eutectic curve, and this is lab. This isn't necessarily field testing, but you can see where, the freeze point is, or in the optimum temps are for these products in a laboratory. But the one thing that I can say about calcium versus mag and sodium chloride is, your calcium chloride is the best way to explain that is it's a thermonuclear explosion in every single pellet. You're going to get a super burn, but you're going to get a refreeze like, out of nowhere. Your magnesium chloride and your sodium chloride, and some of the other panelists have already talked about it, you're going to get a nice, better residual release of those chlorides for a longer period of time on the roadway Just the one last thing too with the organics, like those organics will also help, and we talked about that, of delaying the freeze of the product on the road. I always tell my staff, listen, we're not in the business to burn. We just want to delay the freezing of that product, of the snow that's on the roadway, because the best way to remove snow from the road is to mechanically plow it off the road. You don't burn. If you burn, you have entered a realm of non-sustainability here, and it's going to cost you an arm and a leg with the environment, with your equipment, with your budget, you name it. It is, I always look at sustainability of, there's the monetary component, there's the social component, the environmental component. Sustainability is that little, those three circles all together. It's that little piece in the middle that's sustainable, but everybody's sustainability capacity is different based on what you have for money to spend, what your level of service is, and whether or not you have environmental effects or you have environmental restraints based on where you are. So, it's a great word, but it's a moving target based on where you are and what you got to do.
Thank you so much, Mark. Well, we are going to thank you for sticking with us, folks. This was such a great conversation. We're a little over time, but I appreciate you being with us. And I just want to thank the panelists so much. If there are any questions that you still have, please do not hesitate to get them to me. I'm donna.shea@uconn.edu, and I'm very happy to share them with the panel and get information back out to you. And we will be following up with some resources that we talked about today. Thanks to everyone. This was super. I really appreciate your time and all of the great information. Thanks very much. Anything? Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take good care.
Good to see
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care.
Thanks, Regina.
The panel staying on, Donna?
If you want. I just wanted to say thanks again. That's what